Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take up important articles of the day from the newspaper and discuss them in detail as per the demands of Civil Services exam. Articles covered today are displayed on your screen and their notes in PDF and Word format are provided in the description box down below. Without further ado, let us begin. Now let us start our today's discussion by this first article of the day, which appeared in page 12 of the Hindu newspaper. Now, in this article, the Republican lawmakers who have a majority control in the US House of Representatives, they have moved forward with the plan to impeach the Democratic President Joe Biden. Because the president, he is facing an unproven corruption allegation which is linked to his son Hunter Biden. Now, the topic of impeachment of US President is important from GS Paper 2 perspective. As the syllabus mentions, comparison of Indian constitutional scheme with that of other countries. Hence, impeachment process of US President to that of Indian President is a topic of our today's discussion. Now, this comparison of Indian constitutional scheme, it was asked in mains of the year 2018, where the question asked us to differentiate between Indian concept of secularism with that of Western model. Further, removal from the office of constitutional post holders is also important from prelims perspective. As you can see, a question appeared in prelims of the year 2019 on impeachment of a judge of the Supreme Court of India. Hence, the topic of our today's discussion is comparison between impeachment process of US President as well as that of Indian President. Now, first of all, there are two houses in legislature of United States of America. The first house is known as House of Representatives, and in this house, members are elected on the basis of their population, and hence this house is regarded as the lower house to the United States legislature. While on the other hand, the Senate, it consists of senators who represent each state of United States. Hence, this Senate, it acts as a upper house to the United States legislature. Now let us discuss the impeachment process for United States President. Now the USA Constitution, it states that the President of United States, he can be removed for conviction of treason, bribery, other high crimes or misdemeanors. Hence, the President of United States, he can be removed from the office by a process of impeachment. Now, any member of the House of Representatives, he can introduce a resolution for impeachment of United States President. In case that member, he suspects that the President of United States is guilty of treason, bribery, other high crimes or misdemeanors. Now, the House of Representatives, it considers the set of charges that are levied on the President of United States. And if the House of Representatives, it passes that resolution with just a simple majority, that is support of more than 51% of members, then this impeachment process, it moves to trial. Now the Senate, which is the upper house of the United States legislature, it is where the trial of impeachment process, it begins. And this trial is presided by the Chief Justice of Supreme Court of United States. Hence, the Chief Justice of Supreme Court, he presides over the trial, while members of the House of Representatives, they form the prosecution, whereas on the other hand, the senators, they act as jury. And in this process, the president, he can also appoint defense lawyers who will argue in his favor. Hence, at the end of this trial, the Senate, it decides to deliver a vote. And if that vote, it is passed by at least 2/3 majority of the senators, then this means that the president is guilty of such crimes. And it also means that this president, he is removed from the office, and hence the vice president, he takes over as the president of United States for the remainder of the term. Now, after we have discussed the impeachment process for removal of the president of United States, let us discuss the corresponding impeachment process with respect to Indian president.
Now in India, the president, he can only be removed for violation of the constitution. But the constitution of India, it does not define the meaning of this violation of constitution. Now the impeachment charge against the president of India, it can be moved in either house of the parliament, that is either in Rajya Sabha or in Lok Sabha. Now these charges of impeachment, they need to be signed at least one-fourth members of the particular house in which the charge has been framed. And as a result, a 14-day notice is served to the President of India in this regard. Now this resolution for impeachment, it needs to be passed by the first house with more than two-thirds of majority. And this two-thirds of majority, it should be of total membership of that particular house. And hence, after passage by two-third majority, this resolution is then passed on to the second house of the parliament. And this second house, it investigates the charges against the President of India. Now, if this second house also, it passes the impeachment resolution by majority of more than two-thirds of total membership, then the President of India, he stands to be impeached from the office. And it is from the date on which this particular resolution is passed by the House. Hence, in the scope of our today's discussion, we have highlighted the differences in the impeachment process between United States and that of India. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on impeachment of president of both India as well as that of United States. Now moving on to the next article of the day, which appeared in page 10 and last page of today's Hindu newspaper. Now the World Health Organization, it released a report on hypertension on September the 19th. And according to this report, which relies on a 2019 data, more than 188 million people in India who are between age 30 to 79 years, they have hypertension. And of these 188 million people, the condition of hypertension, it has only been diagnosed in 37% of the population. Whereas on the other hand, 30% of these 188 million people, they are getting treated for this hypertension disease. Whereas only a meager 15% of the 188 million population, they have their hypertension under control. Now this brings into attention the topic of non-communicable disease and its impact on Indian population. And this topic is important from GS Paper 2 perspective, which deals with issues relating to development and management of social sector services relating to health, education and human resources. Further, in the mains of the year 2020, a question appeared on prospects of social development and adequate healthcare policies, particularly in field of geriatric and maternal healthcare. And in this context, the topic of non-communicable disease is an important topic for today's discussion. Now, in the scope of our today's discussion on non-communicable disease, we will first discuss factors that enhance the risk for non-communicable diseases. Then, we will discuss challenges that the country currently faces in handling these non-communicable diseases, which will be further added by initiatives that are taken by Government of India to control non-communicable diseases. Before concluding this discussion, we will discuss suggestions that can be further incorporated in the healthcare sector of our country for more effective control of non-communicable diseases. Hence, let us start our today's discussion by discussing factors that enhance the risk of non-communicable diseases. Now, before discussing what are these factors, let us discuss what is a non-communicable disease. Now, these non-communicable disease, they are chronic in nature and they tend to be of long duration and they form as a result of combination of various factors. Now, these non-communicable disease, they are named so because they are not transmitted between person to person. Hence, these are non-contagious in nature. However, these diseases, they persist for a long time and generally are slow in their progression. Now, NCDs, which include heart diseases, strokes, cancer, diabetes and hypertension, they account for almost 66% of total deaths in the country. Hence, they are important from a policy point of view. Now, let us discuss the factors that enhance the risk of non-communicable diseases. The first and probably the most important factor is that of genetic factors, as it is a major cause for non-communicable diseases such as cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, mental health, as well as asthma. Further, there are also behavioral factors at play, which include lack of physical activity, unhealthy diets, use of tobacco, and harmful use of alcoholic beverages. Further, there are also socioeconomic factors that may enhance the risk of non communicable diseases. As nearly 30% of non communicable disease related deaths in low income countries, they occur under the age of 60 years, whereas this figure is only 13% in high income countries. Hence, we can say that poor socioeconomic factors it enhances the risk of non communicable diseases. Further, urbanization and urban development policy it is also a significant cause for non-communicable diseases. As urbanization it encourages mechanized transport and it discourages physical activity, which means there is less physical nature of both work as well as travel. Whereas, on the other hand, people who live in unfavorable social conditions, such as poor housing, that have no access to common areas such as parks and recreation centers, they are more likely to be overweight or obese. And this, it further increases the risk of non communicable diseases. Towards the end, there are also cultural norms at play. And these cultural norms, they include preferences for foods which are high in animal fats. And these foods, they also have become more socially acceptable. And hence, these fast food, they result in obesity as well as hypertension. And these are the significant cause for deaths which are related to non-communicable diseases. Now, after we have discussed what are factors that enhance the risk of non-communicable diseases, let us now understand what are the challenges that the country currently faces in handling of such non-communicable diseases. Now, the first significant challenge that the country faces in handling of non-communicable diseases is that there is lack of trained human resources in the country. As per a recent report by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, the country it has only one doctor per more than 1500 population. Whereas on the other hand, the WHO it recommends one doctor for every 1000 population. Hence we can see there is shortage of human resources which are trained to handle non-communicable diseases. Also, there is a low budgetary allocation by the government towards these non-communicable diseases. For example, in the budget of 2023 and 24, budget of non-communicable diseases, it was reduced from 500 crores last year to 289 crores this year. Hence, we can see the budgetary allocation for non-communicable diseases has been reduced in a period of 1 year. Further, the country also faces poor implementation of plans that are meant to control non-communicable diseases because there's a lack of comprehensive information pool and management of information system which leads to inefficiency in monitoring the reach and implementation of programs which are related to reduce non-communicable diseases. Further, people in India they have low adherence to medications that are prescribed by the doctors. For example, only 1 out of 2 patients in the country they are taking medications as are directed by the healthcare professionals. Whereas one third of patients who take their medicines they stop their treatments earlier than what is required. Hence, by this example, we can see that the people they have low adherence to medication. Hence, it also increases the risk of non-communicable diseases. Further, the country is also subjected to changing lifestyles, and this has resulted into a sedentary form of lifestyle in urban areas, which is driven by unchallenged aggressive marketing strategies which are employed by unhealthy food and beverage manufacturers. And this further encourages people to adopt unhealthy lifestyle. And hence, it has become a biggest challenge in handling of non-communicable diseases. Now, after we have discussed challenges in handling of non-communicable diseases, let us discuss the government initiatives which are taken in order to curb the menace of non-communicable diseases. Now, the government has taken several initiatives to curb non-communicable diseases. The first of this initiative is called as National Program for Prevention and Control of Cancer, Diabetes, Cardiovascular Diseases and Strokes, which is also known as NCDs program. And this program, it was launched in the year of 2010 by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare under the National Health Mission. And this program is currently being implemented to address common non-communicable diseases like cardiovascular diseases and hypertension, etc. Now, also important is the National Action Plan. As Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, it launched this program in response to WHO's Global Action Plan for Prevention and Control of Non-Communicable Diseases. And this plan, it aims to reduce the number of premature deaths in the country which results from non-communicable diseases by more than 25% by the year of 2025. Further, the government has also taken some of the preventive steps, and this aspect is covered under the comprehensive primary healthcare through Ayushman Bharat Health and Wellness Center scheme. As this scheme, it promotes wellness activities and also ensures targeted communication at the community level. Further, the government is also favoring the use of healthy diet in the country. As by healthy eating, it is promoted by Food Safety and Standards Authority of India through an Eat Right India movement. As this movement, it will help people to develop a healthy dietary plan which will further reduce the chance of non-communicable diseases. Also, the government is encouraging the physical activity by people of India. As through Fit India movement, which will be implemented by Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, it is aimed to improve the physical activity of the population of our country. Further, in the Union Budget of the year 2023 and 24, the Government of India, it came out with an outcome-based budgeting where government, for the first time, it introduced blood pressure, which is hypertension, as well as diabetes treatment as an output indicator. As these indicators, it will help the government ideally reflect its commitment to scale up initiatives against hypertension as well as diabetes. Now, after we have discussed the initiatives which were taken to curb non-communicable diseases, let us now discuss suggestions which is further needed to tackle the menace of non-communicable diseases. Now, the first suggestion in this regard, it involves taking a multi-stakeholder approach. For example, civil society, it can help increase awareness and educate people on healthy lifestyles. Further, there is also a need to improve access to healthcare services. As by improving access to quality healthcare, which includes affordable medication as well as essential medical services, it can help manage people and treat their non-communicable diseases in a more effective manner. Further, there is also a need to engage with communities. As with engaging with different communities in prevention and management of non-communicable diseases, it can prove to be an effective measure in raising awareness and promoting healthy behaviors. Further, the government should also need to focus on implementing its policies and regulation on non-communicable diseases, as these policies and regulation can help limit exposure to risk factors for non-communicable diseases, and it can further discourage the use of alcohol and tobacco, which can prove to be effective in preventing such lifestyle diseases. For example, government can also increase the tax on tobacco and alcoholic products, which will further discourage their consumption in day-to-day life. Further, the government also needs to increase the private sector participation in the healthcare sector, as a collaboration between both the public as well as private sector will help address the growing burden of non-communicable diseases. As in this regard, the private sector it can also play a remarkable role in promoting healthy products and services. Further, there's also a need to increase regional collaboration between countries in Southeast Asian region, which will help create a new and effective regional roadmap to accelerate the control on non-communicable diseases. Further, by focusing on prevention, government can ensure greater efforts towards control of these non-communicable diseases. As these prevention measures, it can include eating good food, exercising, as well as utilizing other wellness practices. Hence, to conclude, we can say that there are both social as well as economic reasons for controlling of non-communicable diseases. Hence, by adopting a multi-stakeholder approach, improving access to healthcare services, engaging communities, implementing policies and regulation, encouraging private sector participation, improving regional collaboration, and focusing on preventive measures can help government control the menace of non-communicable diseases. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on non-communicable diseases. Now moving on to the next article of the day, which appeared in page 16 of today's Hindu newspaper. Now the Parliamentary Committee on Home Affairs, it presented a report on Thursday. And in this report, the committee, it explored the production of cost-effective bracelets and anklet trackers that can be used by prisoners who are out on bail. And this measure, it will help government reduce overcrowding in prisons. Now the topic of prison reforms are important from GS paper 2 perspective. As the syllabus, it highlights government policies and interventions for development of various sectors and issues arising out of their design and implementation. Further, measures that were taken for government policies and interventions, such as Citizens Charter, it was asked in the mains of the year 2018. Hence, the topic of prison reforms is important from mains point of view. And in this context, we will first discuss why is there a need for such prison reforms in the country. Then, we will discuss reform measures that have been undertaken by the government in context of prison management. And before concluding this discussion, we will discuss a suggestive way forward, which will also suggest us measures that can be undertaken in order to improve the functioning of Indian prisons. Hence, let us start our today's discussion by discussing why do we need prison reforms. Now, before discussing the prison reforms, let us discuss how are prisons in India currently managed. Now, the subject of prisons in the country, it is currently in the state list of 7th schedule. Hence, this means that the management and administration of prison, it falls exclusively under the domain of state governments. And in this regard, the management and administration of prisons, they are currently governed by Prison Act of the year 1894. Further, there are also prison manuals of each different states which help governments manage the prisons in their state. However, in this regard, Ministry of Home Affairs, it also provides state governments with regular guidance and advice on various issues concerning prisons and prison inmates. Now, after we have discussed the subjects of prison, let us now discuss why is there a need for prison reforms in the country. Now, the need for prison reform is because Indian prisons currently, they face severe overcrowding. Now, according to Prison Statistics of India, which is brought out by National Crime Records Bureau, it stated that in the year of 2019, there were nearly 4.8 lakh inmates in the country, which is way more than the sanctioned strength of 4.1 lakhs. And this means that Indian prisons, they currently have an occupancy rate of 118%. And this high occupancy rate, it undermines the ability of prison to meet the basic needs of prisoners, such as healthcare, food, as well as accommodation. Further, there is no separation in Indian prisons of under trial inmates, and it means around 75% of inmates in the country, they are under trials. And these under trial inmates, they come into touch with incarcerated inmates, and further they also get influenced in the world of crime. Also, there are several health consequences of long imprisonment. For example, prisoners' health conditions, they deteriorate in prisons which are overcrowded, whereas nutrition in these prisons, they are poor. Further, the sanitation infrastructure in these prisons, they are inadequate, which further reduces the access of inmates to fresh air, and it also makes exercise avenues unavailable for inmates. And all these factors, it results into negative health consequences for Indian prisoners. Further, there is a link between imprisonment and poverty in the country. As imprisonment, it contributes directly of impoverishment of prisoner and his family. For example, family, they experience financial loss as a result of imprisonment of one of its family member, which is further exacerbated by new expenses that needs to be made, such as cost of lawyer, food for imprisoned person, transport for prison visits, and so on. And this, it negatively affects the disposable income that a family currently has. Further, Indian prisons, they also face severe staffing crunch, as about 30% of sanctioned jailed executive staff, these positions, they currently lie vacant. And as a result, at national level, there are average of 7 inmates per prison staff, which is well below the required number of staffs which are required for adequate functioning of Indian prisons. Also, there are issues which are related to women prisoners in the country, as there are lack of female staff in Indian prisons, which is further added by inadequate number of toilets, bathrooms, and other basic preconditions of sanitation and hygiene. Also, physical and sexual violence, they are also a common scenario in Indian prisons. Further, imprisonment of an individual, it has a detrimental social impact on that person. As imprisonment, it disrupts the relationship and weakens the social cohesion in Indian society. And this, it leads to disruption of family structure, which negatively affects the relationships of a prisoner. And hence, it reshapes the family and community across the generation. Hence, due to overcrowding, no separation of under trials, negative health consequences of imprisonment, increasing poverty, severe staffing crunch, and detrimental social impact are reasons for why do we need prison reforms. Now let us discuss what are the reform measures that are already taken by the government for prison reforms. Now the first reform measure, it was taken by a committee report of Justice A.N. Mullah committee. As this committee, it recommended to develop an all India prison service, which will act as a professional career service, and it will help develop a cadre which is able to handle and manage these prisons effectively. Further, the government, it also brought about a model prison manual in the year of 2016. And this manual, it aims at bringing about basic uniformity in laws, rules and regulations which govern and administer the prisons in our country. Further, it will also help improve management of prisoners all around Indian nation. Further, Government of India, it also undertook a modernization of prisons project, which aims to enhance the security of Indian jails, and it also aims to facilitate the task of reformation and rehabilitation of prisoners, which will be undertaken through correctional administration programs. Further, government is also focused on training and correctional activities of Indian prisoners, as government has increased the involvement of NGOs and other non-profit organizations to educate prisoners, Further, government is also providing these prisoners with vocational training courses. It will help them achieve employment once they complete their prison sentences. Further, government also facilitates recreational activities from time to time, and it will help prisoners have a better mental health. Further, government also conducts seminars which will help prisoners become aware of their legal rights as well as health problems. Hence, through educational, vocational training, recreational measures, as well as seminars, the government intends to take training and correctional activities for Indian prisoners. Now, after we have discussed reform measures that were taken for prisoners in the country, let us now discuss what is a suggestive way forward in order to address the issues that is currently plagued in Indian prisons. Now, the first and probably the most important measure in dealing with prisons in the country is the need to reduce overcrowding. And this can be done by various measures such as introducing of open prison, in which inmates are trusted to serve out their sentences under a limited supervision. Further, the government it also needs to improve the system of parole as well as furlough so that the inmates they can maintain their social links while being in prisons. Further, as a result, prison will also be less crammed with inmates. However, this granting of parole and furlough it must be balanced against public interest and can be refused to certain categories of prisoners. Further, the government should also establish fast track courts in the country so that no innocent prisoner he should be forced to spend too much time in Indian jails. Further, government should also encourage the use of technology. For example, automation as well as other technological advances such as introducing GPS trackers to track prisoners can help significantly ease the burden of prison staff. Further, a recommendation was made for establishment of a national commission for prisons which needs to be established to provide a national perspective on prison, and it should act as a central body for management of Indian prisons. Further, there's also a need to introduce a robust grievance redressal mechanism. As this mechanism, it needs to be put in place for all prisons to ensure that right of prisoners they are not violated. And on the other hand, the concerns of prisoners they also needs to be heard in an impartial manner. Further, government should also focus on addressing the healthcare needs of Indian prisoners. As both physical and mental health of prisoners, it needs to be addressed appropriately as well as regularly. And in this regard, the inmate should be provided access to doctors and psychologists as and when it is needed. Further, there's also a need to ensure skill development of prisoners, as by providing educational facilities, vocational training, and skilling facilities in prison itself, it should be upgraded in order to improve the daily lives of prisoners, and it will also give them an economic support after their release from Indian prisons. Hence, by dealing with overcrowding measures, encouraging the use of technology, forming a national commission for prison, having a grievance redressal mechanism, addressing the healthcare needs of prisoners, as well as providing skill development initiative are necessary prison reforms that needs to be taken urgently. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on prison reforms. Now moving on to the last article of the day, which appeared in page 11 of today's Hindu newspaper. Now this article reports that the India bloc of opposition parties in the country, they have announced that they would boycott 14 television news anchors as they did not wanted to legitimize the hate-filled narrative that are there in Indian news channels. Now this measure is an example of self-imposed restriction on exercise of free speech in the country. Now, free speech in India, it is covered under Article 19 of Indian Constitution. And this topic is important from GS Paper 2 perspective. As the syllabus, it mentions Indian Constitution and its significant provisions. Further, exercise of free speech in India, it was asked in the mains of year 2014. where a question asked us to understand the concept of freedom of speech and expression and does it cover hate speeches also. Hence, in the scope of our today's discussion on restrictions on free speech exercise in India, we will first discuss what are legal restrictions on exercise of free speech. Further, we will also discuss the need for such restrictions in a democratic country like ours. Further, we will also discuss issues that are related to such use of restrictions, as well as a suggestive way forward which will help us identify what else measures can be undertaken in order to ensure the balance between exercise of free speech as well as reasonable restrictions. Hence, let us start our today's discussion by discussing what are legal restrictions on exercise of free speech in the country. Now, censorship, it refers to official prohibition or restrictions on any type of expressions. The restrictions can be on films, books, television shows, etc. when it is believed that these content they threaten the political, social and moral order of the country. While censorship, it is regarded as both irrational as well as rational. It is considered rational because it denies the exercise of freedom of speech and expression and also of information. While it may be considered rational on various factors which may be political, religious, or on social grounds. For example, censorship is permitted when it tries to control sedition, blasphemy, obscenity, or prevents disorder. Further, the current framework of Indian Constitution as well as other law, they promote the idea of censorship. As Constitution under Article 19, it favors the idea of freedom of speech and expression. However, this right has been subjected to certain reasonable restrictions under Article 19 subsection 2, and these restrictions can be imposed on grounds namely sovereignty and integrity of India, security of state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency or morality, or in relation with contempt of court, defamation or incitement of offences. Further, Constitution through Article 359 allows for suspension of Article 19, that is exercise of freedom of speech and expression during the times of emergency. Further, as described in today's news, Information Technology Act of 2000 as well as Information Technology Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code, which were formulated under the Article 87 of IT Act, they permit certain restrictions on social media entities. Further, Section 95 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, it authorizes the state government to forfeit copies of any newspaper, book or document that appears to violate certain provisions of IPC. Now, a question might appear, why is any form of censorship needed for society and the country as a whole? Let us discuss this in the next slide. Now, provision of censorship, it guarantees the exercise of personal liberty as activities such as cyberbullying, trolling or defamatory content. These activities, they encroach on people's right to privacy and reputation, which further restricts the right of life with dignity, which is ensured under Article 21 of the Constitution. Hence, it can be said that censorship thus guaranteed the exercise of personal liberty. Further, censorship helps in control the spread of fake news, as fake news and rumors which are spread through social media platforms, and they have several consequences which can range from riots, death threats to actual murders. Hence, censorship, it controls the social order of a country. Further, censorship, it can help prevent religious and ethnic violence, as some form of hate speech, if they are not censored, they can become politically sensitive and hence can create an inflammable situation, like in a state of Manipur currently. Hence, India, who has a history of oppression and religious divide, it requires some form of censorship in order to maintain religious and ethnic harmony. Further, censorship is necessary to ensure that children of the society remain protected, as they have highly impressionable mind. Hence, they should not be exposed to psychologically damaging materials which are available over the course of internet. Thus, for guaranteeing of personal liberty, controlling spread of fake news, prevention of ethnic and religious violence, and protection of children makes censorship necessary for a society. However, there are various issues that are associated with exercise of censorship in a democratic country like India. What are these issues? Let us find out in the next slide. Now, censorship, it prima facie threatens the democracy of a country. As an attack on free speech, it discourages dissent. And in order to showcase a thriving and properly functioning democracy, it is important to have a healthy and broad level of free speech, which should be without a fear of censorship. Further, censorship it deprives freedom of information, as freedom of information is considered inseparable from freedom of speech, and any restriction on flow of content can also restrict the flow of information and hence limit the intellectual development of the individual. Further, censorship can also promote the idea of self-censorship, as psychological effects of widespread government surveillance which are undertaken to monitor the adherence of censorship issues can make citizens self-conscious and fearful, and such apprehension it manifests as a culture of self-censorship. Further, censorship it can limit creative freedom and autonomy, as censorship regulations they may give validity to illegitimate concerns that may have been raised by certain groups against artistic content, and they have a direct implication on exercise of creative freedom and personal autonomy. Also, censorship can help suppress the marginalized voices, as policing of online speeches and implementing a rigid moderation policies can make social media inaccessible to marginalized voice. Further, there are implementation challenges in affecting censorship, as censorship is implemented on idea of subjectivity, which varies from person to person. Further, there has been a potential of misuse which can lead to overregulation or abuse of such provisions. Further, the censorship it has proven ineffective in many cases. As censored material, it has a tendency of finding its way in society through underground channels. And in some cases, censoring content has also led to generation of widespread curiosity in the censored material, which then defeats the purpose of censorship. Now a question may appear, what can be done to resolve issues that are related to censorship? Let us find out in the next slide. Now the first step that is necessary to limit the idea of censorship is to encourage the idea of self-regulation. The self-regulation, it can be set up both in-house and an industry-wide which depends on function that the idea of censorship supposed to serve. Further, there should be a right to choose and consume content, as the tendency to treat the consumer as incapable of making an independent and informed decisions, it needs to be addressed. Instead of outright censorship, increased use of content warnings involving explicit materials can be encouraged. Further, there is a need to promote professional education in the media itself, as ethical standards that respect privacy, dignity, and freedom of speech and expression, it can be developed and inculcated in course curriculums which can be used to train professionals in various media organizations. Further, there is a need for codification of all media laws, as codification it leads to certainty of governing laws and it moves the focus out of distributed statutory laws and precedents and packs the law in a systematic manner. Further, there is an inherent need to limit the censoring power of the state, which can be done to prevent abuse and overuse of power, as any regulatory body should be allowed to take decisions independently, while the government it should act as a facilitator by forwarding or suggesting recommendations. In the end, there is a need to adopt proactive measures, as such steps may involve public education, encouraging diversity, openly combating incendiary information, and improving protection to protect the community at risk. Hence, the question of freedom of speech and expression in India, it needs a nuanced approach. Hence, it becomes the duty of the state to protect the freedom of expression, since the liberty is guaranteed itself against the state.